The fortress moon of Delta 9 was under siege, and the sky above it looked like a storm made of fire. Green plasma streaked across the blackness, cutting through clouds and space dust, setting the horizon alight. Every flash came from the Dravari fleet, the alien swarm that had burned through 7 human colonies before this one. Their ships, vast and alive, howled as they fired, raining destruction on the fortress below. Inside the command hall, the air shook with the sound of explosions. Alarms screamed like sirens of doom. Lights flickered red, and the floor trembled beneath every new strike. Soldiers ran through the chaos, shouting reports, clutching weapons, and checking wounded comrades who lay against the steel walls. The holographic battle map in the center of the room flickered with endless red dots. Enemy forces closing in from all sides. Captain Elias Ward stood at the table, his armor still marked with the dust of a dozen campaigns. His face was calm but hard like carved stone, and his gray eyes moved over the tactical map with cold focus. Around him, the command staff looked to him for orders, waiting for a voice strong enough to cut through fear. "They've breached the upper atmosphere," a technician called out. "First wave of Dravari pods landing in Sector 12. The room tensed. Elias didn't flinch. He leaned closer to the display, voice steady. "Patch me into the defense grid." The technician nodded, fingers racing across the console, but before the link connected, the holofeed flickered and turned to static. Then came a sound, low and hissing, sharp as broken glass. It wasn't human. The voice of the Dravari warlord filled the hall, alien and cruel. "Human fortress will fall. You cannot stop the swarm. Surrender and your deaths will be swift." For a heartbeat, silence fell over the humans. Then Elias smiled, a small dangerous grin. "Guess it's time for an exam," he said softly, almost to himself. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Ria Juno, turned to him with a puzzled look. "Sir?" He met her eyes, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Class siege tactics," he said. "Question 1, do they want ancient, modern, or classified?" The words hung in the air, a mix of grim humor and confidence. Around the room, tension broke just enough for a few soldiers to smirk. The fear didn't vanish, but something stronger replaced it. Resolve. Ria gave a tight smile in return. "Let's give them all 3. Outside, the night of Delta 9 erupted. The fortress's outer walls came alive with fire. Rail guns the size of buildings fired streaks of light that tore through the sky, and defense drones took flight in perfect formations. The sound was deafening, a steady rhythm of human defiance. For every Dravari pod that struck the ground, 10 were burned from the air. The surface became a storm of fire, ash, and steel. Yet through the chaos, Elias could see the pattern. The swarm was adapting fast, shifting its attack lines, learning in real time. The Dravari never stopped. He watched as they moved like rivers of black, climbing over one another, crawling toward the fortress walls. Humanity's strongest outpost in this sector was now the final line. There would be no retreat, no evacuation. Elias walked out onto the fortress balcony as the first impacts shook the ground beneath him. The air was hot, filled with smoke and the metallic taste of ozone. In the distance, the enemy's shapes moved like shadows in a burning sea. He could hear the roars of their living war machines. Behind him, the fortress guns kept firing, and Marines ran to their positions. Ria came to his side. "They're coming hard, sir." Elias nodded, lowering his helmet's visor. "Good," he said. "So are we." The defense sirens rose again, echoing across the barren moon, and the battle for Delta 9 began. Under that burning sky, humanity made its stand. Not as victims, but as warriors ready to turn even the end of the world into a lesson their enemies would never forget. The Dravari swarm came like a storm with no end. They were not like any enemy humanity had ever faced. Their ships were alive. Massive creatures of metal and flesh with armor that pulsed like veins and eyes that glowed in the dark. Each vessel screamed as it moved through the void, a terrible sound that made even veteran soldiers feel small. The Dravari did not build machines. They grew them. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier was part of one living hive that thought as one, hungered as one, and fought as one. When they descended toward Delta 9, the sky itself seemed to open up and bleed. Their drop pods, shaped like jagged eggs, fell in thousands, glowing green as they pierced the clouds. Each impact sent waves of fire and dust rolling across the rocky surface of the moon. The ground shook again and again until it felt like the world itself might crack apart. Inside the fortress, Captain Elias Ward stood before the main viewport, watching as his scanners filled with red markers. The Dravari were everywhere, surrounding the fortress from orbit to ground. His crew moved with trained precision, calling out readings, targeting coordinates, and casualty reports. "Activate drone sentries," Elias ordered, his voice calm in the chaos. "Bring all planetary railguns online. Fire at will." The defense grid woke with a deep, thundering hum. Rail cannons the size of towers rotated toward the sky and unleashed streaks of molten light that tore holes through the darkness. Hundreds of automated drones shot up from hidden bays, forming tight formations that met the falling pods in midair. The battlefield turned into a storm of explosions. Every second another Dravari ship or pod burst apart, painting the clouds in fire. The human fortress fought like a living thing, every gun, drone, and soldier moving in perfect coordination. But no matter how many were destroyed, more came. The Dravari did not retreat or hesitate. They didn't understand fear. They fell from the sky in endless waves, their pods burrowing into the ground, opening like giant flowers to release clawed warriors that screamed in rage. The first breaches began at the outer rim of the fortress, where the impact craters turned into rivers of black insects. "They're coming through Sector 12. Ria Juno's voice cut through the comms, sharp and urgent. "Our turrets can't hold." Elias gritted his teeth and turned toward his officers. "Focus artillery fire on the breach. Every gun we have, don't let them inside." His orders went out, and the fortress responded. The sound of gunfire filled every corridor. Marines lined the walls, firing pulse rifles down narrow trenches. Drones darted between towers, dropping thermal charges into the advancing swarm. It was war in its rawest form. Metal, fire, and flesh colliding again and again. Elias moved through the command post, his mind calculating, adapting, finding patterns in the chaos. Humanity had learned long ago that survival meant more than strength. It meant creativity. The Marines began setting traps and choke points. They used old tactics mixed with modern tools, turning technology and instinct into one. In some sections, they even flooded tunnels with liquid nitrogen, freezing the aliens before blasting them apart. "Ancient tactics, modern weapons," Elias muttered under his breath. For every fallen Marine, 10 Dravari died. Yet still the swarm pushed forward. Hours passed like minutes. Smoke filled the hallways, the air thick with dust and ozone. The fortress trembled from constant impacts. Ammunition stores ran low and medics worked without rest. Even the railguns were overheating from the endless firing. Elias looked at the holomap again. Sector 12 was flickering red. The wall was about to fall. Ria's voice came through the comm again, strained. "Sir, we can't stop them much longer. The outer defenses are gone." For a brief moment, Elias was silent. He could feel the weight of every life depending on him. Then he spoke, his tone hard as iron. "Then we hold the line. Humanity doesn't surrender. Not today. Not ever." He grabbed his rifle, locked in a new energy cell, and walked toward the front lines himself. Around him, soldiers followed, hearts burning with courage. The Dravari were endless, but so was human defiance. The sky burned, the earth shook, and under the storm of plasma and blood, Elias Ward led his people into the fire, ready to prove once again that humanity was the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because of its strength, but because it never gave up. The battle for Delta 9 raged through the long hours of the night until the fortress walls themselves began to tremble under the endless assault. The Dravari came in swarms so thick they looked like rivers of darkness crawling over the silver ground. Each creature moved with perfect precision, their claws cutting through steel and armor alike. The air was filled with the smell of burning metal and scorched flesh. Inside the fortress, the defenders fought with everything they had, but exhaustion was setting in. The Dravari were no longer just at the gates, they were climbing the walls, tearing through defense lines, and flooding into the outer sectors. In Sector 12, the alarms screamed louder than ever. Explosions lit up the corridors in flashes of red and orange. The great steel gate that guarded the outer section began to melt under the pressure of alien acid. Then, with a blinding flash, it broke apart and crashed inward in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The Dravari poured through the opening, hissing and screaming, their bodies covered in shimmering carapace that glowed under the emergency lights. Marines rushed to meet them, firing pulse rifles and tossing grenades into the mass of alien bodies. The sound was deafening. Bullets, plasma bolts, and shrieks mixed into one constant roar. Elias Ward was already there, moving among his soldiers, shouting orders through the noise. "Hold the line!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. When a Marine fell beside him, Elias snatched the fallen soldier's grenade belt and hurled it straight into the advancing swarm. The blast tore through the front ranks, sending limbs and green blood flying across the walls. But for every creature that fell, 2 more took its place. They climbed over their dead and kept coming. Ria's voice crackled through the comms, filled with static and urgency. "Captain, we can't contain them. They've broken through the lower corridor." Elias ducked behind a piece of broken armor plating, breathing hard. "Fall back to the secondary line," he ordered. "Seal the tunnels behind you." The fortress trembled again as the inner gate slammed shut. But even then, Elias knew it was only a matter of time before the Dravari broke through again. Humanity was fighting against a tide that couldn't be stopped by normal means. Elias turned to his wrist console and entered a code no one else knew. His visor screen flashed red. "Authorization Alpha 7 confirmed." A cold mechanical voice responded in his ear. "Command authorization received. Activating Project Revenant." Deep within the heart of the fortress, something stirred. Massive hangar doors creaked open, dust and smoke spilling into the corridors. From the shadows, giant figures began to move. Old machines, long forgotten, rose from their resting place. They were Titans, war exosuits from the earliest days of human expansion, towering relics of steel and fury. Built before the Federation existed, their armor was thick, their weapons brutal, and their design raw and powerful. Elias moved toward one of them, the largest of the group, its name etched into its shoulder plate. Atlas. He climbed the old metal ladder to the cockpit, his heart pounding as the hatch opened with a hiss. Inside, the air was cold, heavy with the scent of oil and age. He settled into the pilot's chair, gripping the ancient controls as the Titan systems hummed to life. The display screens flickered with old data feeds, then stabilized. "Systems online," the machine's deep voice said. Power coursed through the armor like lightning, and Elias felt it pulse through him. "Let's dance," he muttered. Outside, the Dravari roared as the ground began to shake under Atlas's steps. The Marines stopped firing for a moment, eyes wide as the Titans emerged from the hangars like metal gods rising from the ashes. Atlas raised its massive arm, energy building at its cannon. The air around it shimmered with heat, then exploded in a blinding flash. The blast ripped through the swarm, vaporizing hundreds of Dravari in an instant. The ground split open from the impact. The fortress shook, but this time from human power, not alien fire. Cheers erupted from every channel as soldiers saw hope rise again in the form of their old giants. Elias pushed forward, every step of the Titan leaving deep craters in the ground. "Ancient weapons," he said through the comms, his voice steady and fierce, and for an ancient kind of war. And with that, Atlas charged into the swarm, firing shot after shot, the fortress once again roaring with the sound of defiance. The tide of battle had turned, if only for a moment, and humanity stood tall against the darkness once more. The war for Delta 9 had become a storm without end. The fortress still stood, though its walls were cracked and scorched, and its towers leaned under the weight of endless fire. Smoke filled the air, turning the sky a dull red, yet even through the haze, the light of human resistance burned bright. Above the ruined surface, the space around the moon was alive with fury. The Dravari fleet hung in orbit like a swarm of metal beasts, their organic ships twisting and pulsing as they fired massive bolts of plasma at the defending human vessels. The human destroyers, sleek angular ships forged from titanium and willpower, moved in tight formations, trading blows with monsters 10 times their size. The void was full of explosions that flared like new suns. Missiles streaked through the darkness, railguns spat fire, and energy shields glowed and shattered under the relentless assault. Each human ship that fell did so with guns blazing, refusing to die quietly. Inside the fortress, Captain Elias Ward stood over the command table, his armor covered in ash and blood. His voice was hoarse from shouting orders, but his eyes were sharp as ever. The holomap above the table showed the battle both in the sky and on the ground. Red lights blinked everywhere. Enemy clusters, damaged sectors, and dying ships. Then the comm line crackled to life with the voice of Admiral Voss from orbit. "Captain Ward, this is the fleet. We can't hold the upper atmosphere much longer. The swarm is cutting through our shields. You've got 20 minutes before they isolate Delta 9 completely." Elias stared at the map, watching as the human formation grew thinner by the second. "Understood, Admiral," he said. "We'll buy you the time you need." He closed the comm and turned to Ria Juno, who stood beside him, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. Send me the coordinates for their command node, he said. Rhea frowned. You're not thinking what I think you are. Elias gave her a tired smile. I'm always thinking what you think I am. She hesitated. That's suicide, sir. He picked up his rifle, slung it across his back, and met her gaze. That's why it'll work. Outside, the Titans were still fighting. Atlas led the charge, its heavy footsteps shaking the earth with every strike. Around it, the surviving Marines rallied, their courage renewed by the sight of the ancient war machines. Plasma fire rained down from the Dravari ships above, lighting the battlefield in a harsh green glow. The human fortress, though battered, refused to fall. Over the comms, Elias's voice thundered. All units, listen up. We have one target left, the hive brain. It landed on the north ridge, and it's controlling the entire swarm. We take it out and we take them all down. The line filled with static, then Rhea's voice answered. Copy that, Captain. But how do we get close enough? Elias grinned inside his helmet. We don't sneak, Lieutenant. We storm. The remaining Titans turned toward the ridge, followed by what was left of the human forces. Tanks rolled over broken ground, drones darted overhead, and soldiers ran behind them, weapons blazing. The advance looked like something out of humanity's oldest wars. Brutal, direct, fearless. The Dravari met them in full force. The swarm covered the hills, a moving wall of chitin and claws shrieking as it came. Plasma bolts and acid spit filled the air. The first wave hit hard, but the Titans held their ground, swinging their cannons and crushing aliens underfoot. Every blast from Atlas tore huge holes through the enemy lines. The Marines fought behind cover, firing until their guns overheated, then switching to blades and grenades. Elias was everywhere, charging, shouting, fighting like a man born for war. The ridge was a nightmare of smoke and blood, but the humans pushed forward inch by inch. The ground shook from explosions. Flames spread through the alien ranks as the fortress artillery joined in, sending long-range shells screaming through the sky. The Dravari were vast in number, but humanity's determination burned hotter than their fire. The Titans moved like gods of war, and the soldiers beneath them fought with the strength of legends. Every step forward was earned in blood, every victory marked by loss. Elias led from the front, refusing to retreat. He knew that this battle was more than survival. It was a message. Humanity might bend, but it would never break. As the ridge came into view, the hive brain pulsed like a massive living heart, casting a sickly green light across the battlefield. Elias tightened his grip on the Titan's controls and whispered into the comm. All units, prepare for the final strike. This is where we end it. The words echoed across the burning world as the humans charged once more into the fire, their courage blazing brighter than the stars above. The ridge was a mountain of death and fire, covered in smoke and the broken bodies of both human and Dravari soldiers. The air shimmered with heat and the ground shook with every explosion. At the center of it all pulsed the Dravari hive brain, a monstrous living structure that looked like a heart made of bone and light. Its surface moved like breathing flesh, sending green energy veins across the battlefield, feeding life into the swarm. Every Dravari on Delta 9 fought through its command, guided by one thought, one will. If the hive brain fell, the entire swarm would collapse. Captain Elias Ward stood inside his Titan Atlas, watching the nightmare unfold on his display. Around him, the surviving Marines fought like demons, their armor scorched and cracked, but their spirits unbroken. Rhea's voice came through the comms, heavy with exhaustion. Captain, we can't keep this up. The swarm's too strong. Elias looked toward the massive creature pulsing at the ridge and replied, Then we stopped fighting the swarm. We cut out its heart. The Marines rallied for one final push, but the Dravari defenses around the hive were stronger than anything they had faced before. Bioturrets rose from the ground, firing plasma bolts that melted steel. The air filled with acid mist, and every step forward cost lives. Still, humanity advanced. Atlas led the charge, its arm cannon blasting through alien walls while its heavy steps crushed anything in its path. Every movement echoed like thunder, shaking the ridge. As Elias fought his way closer to the hive brain, his sensors screamed warnings. Radiation spikes, structural failures, power drains. Atlas was taking too much damage, but retreat was not an option. Rhea, he called through the comms, keep your unit back. I'm going through. Her voice broke with disbelief. You'll never make it out. Elias smiled faintly. Wasn't planning to. The ground beneath the hive was alive, shifting as though the planet itself wanted to stop him. Massive Dravari beasts rose from tunnels, Creatures the size of buildings, their bodies covered in glowing armor plates. They roared, and their energy blast slammed into Atlas, rocking the Titan backward. Elias gritted his teeth, pushing the controls forward, forcing Atlas to stand tall. He fired the rail cannon at point-blank range, and one of the creatures exploded in a burst of green fire. The others swarmed him, claws scraping against the Titan's armor, tearing at its limbs. Warnings flashed red across his display. Atlas was breaking apart. Still, Elias kept fighting, punching through one beast's chest and crushing another underfoot. "Come on, you monsters," he growled. "Let's finish this test." When the last of the Titans fell silent and the ridge was nearly lost, Elias reached for the small silver capsule on his armor, a device sealed by military law, forbidden for use. Inside pulsed humanity's most dangerous secret, a fragment of Project Revenant known only to a handful of commanders. He opened the capsule, revealing a tiny cube of glowing metal. "Project Revenant Phase 2, Ghost Protocol," he whispered. Ria's horrified voice echoed through the comms. "Captain, that's banned tech." "It could..." "Yeah," Elias said with a grin, "so let's not tell anyone." He slammed the cube into the Titan's core. For a heartbeat, everything went white. Then the battlefield changed. Atlas shimmered with ghostly light, splitting into dozens of flickering images. Quantum echoes of the Titan spread across the ridge, each moving at impossible speed. The Dravari fired wildly, unable to tell which target was real. The air filled with blinding light and thunder as Atlas tore through their ranks like a phantom storm. The Dravari screamed, confused, disoriented, breaking their formation. Marines took advantage of the chaos, charging forward with renewed fury. Elias pushed deeper toward the hive brain, every echo of Atlas tearing down walls and scattering the swarm. The hive tried to defend itself, firing bolts of energy that passed harmlessly through the illusions. The Titan systems burned with energy far beyond their limits, but Elias didn't stop. He reached the center of the hive where the great heart pulsed like a sun, its light blinding. The Titan's cannon hummed as he aimed it straight at the core. For a moment there was silence. Elias took a deep breath and said quietly, "Class dismissed." Then he fired. The explosion that followed turned the world into light. The ridge vanished in fire and shockwaves, and the hive brain shattered into pieces. Across the battlefield, the Dravari screamed as their link broke. One by one, they fell silent. The swarm was dead. When the light faded, only the sound of wind remained. Atlas stood at the edge of the crater, burning, its armor melting under the heat. Inside, Elias sat in silence, his body exhausted, his heart steady. The mission was over. Humanity had survived again, not through strength alone, but through courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will to fight back, no matter the cost. The battle for Delta 9 was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any noise. The land was a graveyard of fire and steel. The once shining fortress now stood scarred and broken, its walls blackened, its towers cracked, yet somehow still standing against the wind. Smoke curled into the pale dawn sky, mixing with the thin atmosphere of the moon. The ground was covered with the wreckage of war. Shattered drones, burnt-out tanks, fallen Marines, and the twisted remains of the Dravari swarm. The hive brain was gone, reduced to ash, and with it, the connection that had driven the aliens into their frenzy. Across the battlefield, Dravari corpses lay motionless, their once glowing armor now dull and lifeless. The planet was quiet for the first time in days, the kind of quiet that comes only after everything worth shouting for has been spent. Inside what remained of the fortress, Ria Juno moved through the wreckage, searching for survivors. Her armor was dented, her visor cracked, but she didn't stop. Every few steps she called out names, hoping to hear a voice answer. Most times there was only the wind. Finally, she reached the outer courtyard where the ground was still warm from the blast. In the distance, half buried in rubble and dust, she saw a familiar shape, the giant frame of the Titan Atlas. Its armor was scorched, its limbs frozen mid-stride. Its weapon still pointed at the crater where the hive brain had once been. For a long moment, Ria simply stood there staring. Then she ran toward it, climbing over broken stone and fallen metal until she reached the cockpit. With trembling hands, she pried open the scorched hatch. Inside, sitting in the dim light, was Captain Elias Ward. His armor was cracked, his face pale, but his eyes were open. He was alive. She let out a breath that was half a sob, half a laugh. "You crazy bastard," she whispered. "You actually did it." Elias gave a tired smile and looked out at the ruined horizon. "Looks like we passed the exam," he said softly. Ria climbed into the cockpit beside him, sitting on the edge of the chair. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind blew through the ruins, carrying the faint scent of smoke and metal. "Command says the Dravari are retreating," Rhea finally said. "Across 3 sectors. Whatever you did, it broke them." Elias nodded slowly. "They'll come back one day." "They always do. But next time we'll be ready." His voice was calm, almost peaceful. Rhea looked at him, her eyes tired but warm. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. He was silent for a while, staring at the rising sun that painted the battlefield in shades of gold and red. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but sure. "Every second," he said. "Because humanity doesn't just fight to survive. We fight to remember who we are." He stood up from the seat, wincing as his injured leg protested, and stepped out of the Titan. Around them, soldiers were gathering, some limping, some helping others stand, all of them covered in soot and blood. They looked exhausted, but in their eyes burned something fierce, pride. Against every odd, against every terror the galaxy had thrown at them, they were still alive. The fortress might have been broken, but the people who defended it were unbreakable. Elias looked at them, then at Rhea. "Ancient, modern, classified. It doesn't matter," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "The exam's always the same." Rhea gave a tired smile. "And what's the question, Captain?" He turned toward the sunrise, the light reflecting off the cracked armor of Atlas, and answered, "How far will humanity go to protect its own?" The survivors stood together in silence, watching the dawn rise over Delta 9. The light spread slowly, touching the shattered battlefield and the ruins of the fortress, washing away the darkness that had hung over them for so long. In that moment, it wasn't victory they felt, it was endurance. They had faced the impossible and had not broken. The universe would remember this place not as a tomb, but as a symbol. A whisper spread among the surviving fleets and colonies in the weeks that followed, stories told by soldiers and travelers alike. Tales of the ghost of Delta 9, the human who turned an invasion into a lesson and made war itself his classroom. Across the stars, enemies who had once thought of humanity as weak began to hesitate. For the first time, they feared the people who refused to die quietly. And somewhere, aboard a rebuilt ship drifting toward another battlefield, Captain Elias Ward sat before a new mission file, a faint smile on his face. "Next exam," he murmured. "Let's make it a hard one."